Greetings and welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Bulali and today we are making the best video about the GOAT, the greatest of all time, Ibokwe, Lewis Hamilton. So, what can we say about Lewis? Today he becomes officially a 7-time world champion. And I guess let's start at the beginning. Lewis Hamilton came into Formula One in 2007. Coming in quite highly anticipated. His entrance was highly anticipated. I mean, back then, the idea of a rookie coming into a top team, being McLaren Mercedes at the time, was completely unheard of. And more than coming in as a rookie, he's coming in as a rookie against the guy who's just beaten Michael Schumacher twice, being Fernando Alonso. So I want to start with the context of how Lewis Hamilton came into Formula One and why there will never, unless the rules change, there will never be another Lewis Hamilton. Back then, this is now 2007, the mid 2000s, Formula One was completely different in various ways, especially testing. The amount of testing you were allowed to do back in the day, you could run your car as if a team could afford it, they could test their car every single day for 365 days if they could afford to run it. I remember after Schumacher lost the title in 2005 to Fernando Alonso, he basically cancelled December and decided he's just going to test the car throughout what is the European winter. So Lewis Hamilton came in, having been developed by McLaren since he was about 11 years old, having been taken into a McLaren Young Driver program, developed through Ron Dennis. He was very close to Ron Dennis and came into Formula One as probably, he was said at the time to be the best prepared rookie ever. Obviously referring to how much mileage he had actually had in the Formula One car by the time he came onto the racetrack. So Lewis was brilliant in the junior categories. In fact, never lost to a teammate in the entire junior categories. What is now called F2, it was called GP2 back then. There's a famous video, ironically, at the same track, which is Turkey, where we race today, where Lewis Hamilton had a spin and dropped from, I think, first to 16th or 17th or something. And within a very short space of, I think there were about 8 laps left, he overtook literally everyone and finished second. And I mean, that's when it was just clear that, look, there's greatness here. There are a lot of videos of them coming up in GP2 racing with Vettel and other drivers who've since come into F1. But, Lewis was always just one step ahead of everyone. So he comes into McLaren in 2007 and absolutely no one is expecting him to beat Fernando Alonso. I mean, Fernando Alonso has just beaten Michael Schumacher twice, being 2005 and 2006. So no pressure. You're in a top team, but you're up against a double world champion. No one's really expecting you to beat him. And he comes in and he's quick right off the bat. I mean, I remember seeing that yellow helmet, and obviously, if you had been a Formula One fan, or at least you had looked into the history of Formula One, you would have immediately noticed the correlation between that yellow and Ayrton Senna's yellow from late 80s, early 90s. So he comes into McLaren, first race, P3. Within about 5-6 races, he starts winning. And, it sort of becomes a reality that he's leading the championship. Not finishing first. So he was second. He was always second, third. I think his first 8 races were all podiums. So even though without winning, he was in the lead of the championship. And then he won, of course, in Canada 2007, being his first win. And that's when everyone was sort of like, wait a minute, is a rookie really going to take the championship? Because, no matter how good you are when you are very young and you're new, everyone thinks you can't sustain a certain level of performance over the season. So Lewis goes, he starts winning, actually upset McLaren completely. Because at the time, if you took in a double world champion, you would expect him to be your number one driver. The last thing you would think when you take in a double world champion and a rookie, 2 new drivers who are actually both new to the team for that year. is that the rookie is going to challenge the double world champion. I mean, that's just unthinkable, but that's what he did. Of course, I think Lewis fans will bleed, hearts will bleed a bit. It comes down, the championship comes down to the wire. Lewis has actually had a significant lead because back then a win was only 10 points. And Lewis was leading by, I think, 17 points or something. And he goes into China. Now McLaren has become a civil war team because Fernando Alonso wants to win the championship and Lewis also wants to win the championship. And the team, I think, was behind Lewis more than was behind Fernando. In fact, famously, Fernando even had an FIA official in the McLaren garage to check everything, to check that his car was not being prejudiced against Lewis's car. That's how serious this got. Of course, it culminated in Turkey, in Hungary. It culminated in Hungary, where Lewis ignored a team order to go out, to let Fernando go out in front of him for qualifying. So Fernando Alonso got extremely angry, as you'd expect. And when they came in to change tires to do their quick runs, Fernando Alonso famously waited in his pit box and basically ran the clock down until Lewis couldn't actually get enough time to do a lap. Fernando got a penalty for that, and that's where the relationship between Fernando and McLaren was completely destroyed. So the season carries on from there. Lewis went on to win that race, and the season carried on from there all the way to China. China, in that year, 2007, was the second last race of the year. So we get to China. Lewis has this big lead, and all he needed to do actually was to come fifth in China, and he'd win the championship. That was it. But instead, he wanted to win, and Ron Dennis wanted him to win. In fact, there's a famous radio message where Ron Dennis says to Lewis, "We are racing the other car being Fernando Alonso in the other McLaren." And of course, they did, very similar to yesterday, a super long stint on the intermediate tire. The tire was completely worn down to literally to the metal. And when he came into the pits, now, of course, when you're racing on a wet track, where the cars are driving, the track is constantly drying as the cars come through, and Formula 1 cars create a massive amount of suction. So they actually lift the water off the ground and, disperse it into the air. So the track becomes dry very quickly if the cars are running on the racing line. And what happened is when he came into the pits in China, the pit lane, because cars are not running on the pit lane and definitely not running at full speed, the pit lane was a lot wetter than the rest of the track. So when he came in, turned, and famously went off into the gravel trap, and that was it. Got no points from that race. And then in Brazil, also things went wrong. The car sort of stalled on him for about 30 seconds, and he lost a lot of positions and ended up losing the championship by 1 point to Kimi Raikkonen. So came back in 2008. That season, a lot of Fernando had left the team, and that season was quite rough. I mean, a lot of crashing with Felipe Massa, famously in their fight for the title, and Lewis ends up overtaking Timo Glock in the rain after switching to intermediates on the final corner of Brazil in 2008 to win the title by 1 point. I mean, that was just Hollywood stuff. But yeah, he hasn't had, there's this perception that Lewis has had an easy run in Formula One, and nothing could be further from the truth. He never won a title from 2008 to 2014. That's 6 years without winning a title, while basically knowing you're the best driver. You just couldn't win. McLaren, 2009 was a complete abomination. 2010, we were there and thereabouts, but Red Bull, I think, was now coming into its stride with the Adrian Newey design and the blown exhausts. 2011 was a complete disaster. In fact, 2011, I think, was the first year Lewis really started to embrace being a celebrity over being a driver. And I think for that year, those two things conflicted, and he was just terrible. 2012, Lewis should have won. That's the year he decided to leave McLaren. 2012, McLaren built the fastest car, but had some new strategy, a new pit lane system. I think that's when they brought in the electric guns, which signaled automatically and all that. But the pit stops were an absolute mess. And that's essentially what cost him the 2012 title. With a bit of unreliability, famously retiring from the lead in Singapore. And, as his car just conked out, you just saw his helmet go like this, and you knew, okay, he's leaving McLaren. Leaves McLaren, goes to Mercedes. Mercedes at the time was sort of a midfield team. Mercedes hadn't really, I think they'd won one race with Rosberg in China 2012, but they were not a championship team yet. Goes to Mercedes, and in 2013 sort of starts taking over Mercedes because Rosberg had been there forever. Joins Rosberg at Mercedes and starts making the team his. Gets his first win in Hungary, which is one of his favorite tracks. Famously lost what I think was a famous what would have been his first 2013 win at the British Grand Prix. That was the race where the Pirelli tires exploded. Almost everyone's tires just exploded. Lewis's tire rear left exploded from number one in that race. And that's how he didn't get that win. So, it was years that 2009 to 2014, there was a lot of rough going on there. But of course, he would have known what Mercedes was working on for the turbo hybrid era. Of course, no one knew what was going to happen. The engine change in terms of the engine, the power unit, was so dramatic, built coming into 2014, that it was literally a lottery. No one knew what was going to happen. But of course, Mercedes hit their straps, and as they say, the rest is history. So Lewis takes 2014, 2015, loses 2016 somehow. I'm quite bitter about that season because besides the famous Malaysia engine failure from the lead, I felt Lewis, I don't think that's what cost him the title. I felt there were a few races there. I remember Singapore that year. I think he qualified fifth and, just had about two off weekends. And Rosberg was there to capitalize. So much respect to Rosberg for being able to take a championship in the same team as Lewis Hamilton. That's virtually impossible. So respect to Rosberg for that. But of course, after then, Lewis didn't take anything for granted. He came back 2017. 2017, Ferrari had a very fast car. In fact, Vettel was leading the title for quite a long time until he famously crashed out in Singapore in the rain. Turn one, made a huge swing to the left, hit Max Verstappen, hit his teammate, took all three of them out, took Fernando Alonso out. And Lewis had a terrible qualifying that race. I think it started sixth. And suddenly, after the first lap, he was in P1 in the rain, which is his dominant conditions. And that's where the 2017 title swung to Lewis. The 2018 title, again, Ferrari came back very strong with Vettel. Vettel was leading the championship all the way up to Germany, where Vettel famously crashed out in the rain while being hunted by Lewis, who had qualified 14th, and Vettel was on pole. And Lewis was coming through the field and catching Vettel quite fast. There was a period in that race where Kimi Raikkonen held up Vettel for quite some time, about 5 laps. And I thought that was poor from Ferrari. They should have easily just said, Kimi, get out of the way. Because that's where the pressure started building on Vettel, and he ended up crashing. Lewis ended up winning. That is a huge swing in the championship, and Lewis went on to win that. Vettel in Baku 2018 should have been black flagged for hitting Lewis on purpose under the safety car. Still bitter about that. But we ended up taking the 2018 title. 2019, that was essentially almost a cruise. Ferrari did come on strong, cheating with their engine, but came on strong. Lewis had to fight. We lost Monza, Charles Leclerc's won. We lost Belgium, which was Charles Leclerc's first win. Managed to win Canada. I think Vettel was probably unfairly penalized for that, but that was, it was tough. That was a tough season when Ferrari eventually came on, but Mercedes, I think, had taken 1-2s in the first 6 races of 2019. And the gap was just too big by then, and, it was Lewis's title. Come 2020, no one knew what was going to happen. Well, at least as soon as you saw the Mercedes hit the track in testing, you knew, okay, they've got a way better car. I mean, the way that team has innovated and made huge strides from already being so dominant. But of course, then COVID happened. No one knew what was going to happen. At certain points, we never even knew we'd get a season. And we never knew we'd get a championship season, because a championship season has to have at least 8 races. So we just didn't know what was going to happen in 2020. But we knew if we do get racing, the Mercedes is going to win, and most likely Lewis was going to win. But onto today's race specifically, I think today I'm very happy that Lewis took his 7th title in what was undoubtedly a champion's drive. I mean, you look at the closest driver to Lewis now, by many people's opinion, is Max Verstappen. And you look at Max Verstappen today, I think today Max Verstappen showed why he is not on Lewis's level, pace aside. I mean, pace is one thing. Of course, you need speed, but you also need a calm head. You need to be able to work out the percentages over a 20-race season in order to win championships. Today, Verstappen, I thought, showed some level of immaturity. I think he just didn't get over what happened in qualifying yesterday, where he felt he should have gotten the pole, but did not get the pole after switching to intermediates. I mean, on wet tires, he was about 4 seconds ahead of everyone. And, switched to intermediates. They didn't really work on the Red Bull. He came second. He was absolutely distraught. But I think failed to put yesterday behind him and focus on the race today. Got a terrible start. Was stuck behind Perez. Now, there was a period where Verstappen was stuck behind Perez and Hamilton was stuck behind Vettel. And when you look at the way the two of them handled those two periods, that's where you start to see, okay, this is an experienced champion. He's just biding his time. He knows the track conditions are changing constantly. He knows it could come to him at any point, which it did. Vettel pitted, and the track just came to Lewis, and he was faster than everyone, passed everyone into the lead. Whereas Verstappen was trying to clear Perez quickly and showed frustration in how he attempted to overtake Perez. I mean, you can't, in the rain, go offline onto the wet line just before such a high-speed corner. Because once you go offline, your tires are getting wetter, you're getting better downforce because there's no car in front of you. But as soon as Perez goes into that apex and Verstappen has to inevitably pull behind him, he's going to suddenly lose a lot of downforce and he's going to have wetter tires than everyone else. And that's what happened. That's what led him to spin, because as soon as he switched behind Perez, just that momentary loss of downforce where Perez's car, he's no longer now getting all that clean air. He's now just behind Perez's car, loses his downforce for just that second, goes off onto the wet line and goes off track where it's basically a river. So he lost it there completely. And, but you saw Lewis stuck behind Vettel, frustrated, made a few attempts, went a bit wide here and there, but did not do anything that completely ruined his race. He just waited, Vettel pitted, and track came to Lewis, and he was gone. He won. Absolute champion's drive. So, yeah, we have the GOAT, 7 titles. Very soon, he'll have 100 wins and 100 poles. And, basically the greatest of all time debate will inevitably come up, because statistically, he is the greatest of all time. He's beaten Schumacher in almost every record and equaled the championships. So, although comparing greats is very difficult because you need to bring the context of eras. You get in different eras, you have different rules. You think to yourself, okay, like I said at the start of the video, no one can do what Lewis did in terms of challenging for a title in a top team in his first year. Because the way drivers are now developed and brought into Formula One, they're coming in a lot earlier, but with a lot less testing mileage and a lot less F1 experience. So it takes years. I mean, Verstappen took a good 3 years before he won his first race. And although he's very young, he's had a lot of years to develop while racing. So you get those contrasts between eras. I mean, if you look at the stats, one thing is Lewis Hamilton's qualifying to win ratio is almost 1-to-1. I think he's got about 97 poles and 92 wins, or 93 wins after today. Whereas you look at Schumacher, he had 68 poles and 91 wins. So that ratio is completely the opposite. And that is partially because when Schumacher was racing, the qualifying format was completely different. There was a time where you had to carry your qualifying fuel into the race. And as a result of that, you often had to sacrifice pole position to carry more fuel into the first stint of the race and run a longer first stint, which is what Ferrari preferred to do. And as a result, they got a lot of wins from P2, P3 by carrying more fuel in qualifying and then carrying that into a longer first stint in the race. So all those things come into it. You could go, if you go really back into the day, you go into Senna's day, they were doing about 13 races a year. Hamilton's doing 22 races a year. That's 10 extra races every year in which to, build up stats, build up wins. And the point scoring system also changed quite dramatically. A win used to be 10 points, it's now 25 points. So certain records, really, when you bring time context into it, you can't really draw direct comparisons. But having said all that, Lewis, 7 titles, close to 100 wins, 100 poles, and today just a absolute champions drive to win his 7th title from P1 in absolute style. I mean, the difference between him and his teammate today was, I mean, it was laughable, literally. So, yeah, very happy. I had a feeling, ironically, when Michael Schumacher retired, there was a press conference where Kimi Raikkonen was announced as Michael Schumacher's replacement, and everyone asked him, does he think he can reach Schumacher's records? And ironically, Kimi said, he just outright said, I won't be racing that long. I'm not interested. I won't even be here that long. Which is quite ironic because Kimi is now the most experienced driver in Formula One. He's been here longer than everyone else in history. So, yeah, very happy. Lewis, what a champion. Of course, the first black driver in Formula One, but he's been so brilliant that the fact that he's black or he's the first black driver is almost forgotten because he's just operated at such a standard that you've needed to bring no caveats or, support his achievements with any, sort of outer stats or facts or whatever. He's just been a brilliant driver from the start till now. And I honestly think he's got another 5 years in him if he wants to. If he wants to, he can race for another 5 years. He will still be fast as hell in 5 years' time. So I suppose it's up to him. If I were him, I'd probably take next year and not stick around for the big rule change in 2022. But hopefully he does stick around, and let's see what more he can achieve. Okay, thanks for watching. I've had a great time making this one. And please feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.